That was accepted. But the breeding barn, the one that held Sinclair's Morgan stallions and his best quarter horse May animals representing 20 years of careful bloodline selection, was 20 feet from the east barn, and the wind was wrong. The breeding barn doors were latched. Inside, the horses were screaming. Jesse could see from where he pulled up that no one was going to the breeding barn. He rode to the foreman. "The horses," Jesse said, "roof's going." The foreman said he was a practical man making a practical calculation. "I'm not sending men in under that." Jesse looked at the breeding barn. He looked at the roof, the way the smoke was coming through the boards, the specific pattern that told him how much time was left. He got off his horse. He pulled his bandana, soaked it at the water trough, tied it across his face, and pulled the latch on the breeding barn door. The foreman grabbed his arm. "You'll die in there." Jesse looked at him. "How many horses?" he said. 11, the foreman said. Jesse went in. The smoke inside was a living thing. Not the clean smoke of an outdoor fire, but the dense directional smoke of an enclosed space where the combustion has been building for an hour. Jesse moved by sound. The horses were in full panic. Hooves against the stall walls, the specific terror of animals who understand the danger and cannot reach the door. He found the first stall by touch, got the halter on a Morgan stallion that was trying to kill everything in its reach, and talked to it the way you talk to an animal that is beyond reason. Not with words, but with tone. The specific frequency that says, "I am not the danger." The horse let him lead it to the door. He went back stall by stall, trip by trip, losing count. On the fourth trip, a beam above him groaned with the sound of structural failure deciding on a timeline. He got the horse out. He went back. He was on the 8th horse when his legs stopped working correctly and he went down to one knee in the straw. And the horse he was leading pulled him back to his feet by sheer momentum and he held the halter and let it pull him to the door. Outside the air hit him and he sat in the dirt because sitting was what his body had decided. 3 horses were still inside. He got up. The foreman stepped in front of him. "The roof is going." 3 more. Jesse said, "You can't." Jesse walked around him. He went back in for 3 more. When he came out the last time, the roof came down 12 seconds after he cleared the door. A sound like the world ending. And Jesse sat in the dirt again, with his eyes watering so badly he couldn't see. And he heard Richard Sinclair's voice, not directed at him, just present. The voice of a man arriving at a scene and taking inventory. Jesse heard him count the horses. 11, Jesse heard him stop counting. Then he heard footsteps in the dirt and a hand on his arm. And Richard Sinclair pulled Jesse Calloway to his feet and held his arm until he was steady. And neither of them said a word. The smoke had done something to Jesse's lungs. Not permanently. The ranch hand, who had some medical knowledge, said so with the cautious confidence of someone operating at the edge of his expertise. But for the next several weeks, heavy work was going to be a problem. Physical labor in the heat of a Montana summer with compromised lungs was not something a body recovered from quickly. Jesse understood what this meant. His oats were in the ground. His fence was standing. His 4 cattle were in the south pasture. But the work of late summer, the haying, the harvesting, the preparation for winter was going to require what he did not currently have. He went home the morning after the fire. He sat on his porch and looked at his property and did the arithmetic. On the second day after the fire, 2 of Sinclair's ranch hands appeared at Jesse's gate. No message, no explanation. They tied their horses and went to the north field and began the haying with the efficient movements of men who have been told to do a job and are doing it. Jesse came out of the house. "Mr. Sinclair sent you," he said. The older one looked at him. "He said the oats won't wait and you can't cut them." Jesse looked at his field. He looked at the 2 men. He looked at his hands, which were bandaged where the burns from the barn had blistered. He almost said he didn't need the help. It was right there. 11 years of managing alone, of not asking for anything from anyone, of building something with his own hands and nobody else's. He felt it the way he always felt it, the specific resistance of a proud man against accepting what he needs. He thought about Eleanor correcting his post angle on the second day. He thought about how he had driven those posts wrong for 4 days before she came. He thought about the fence that was standing correctly because he had given her the post driver. "Thank you," he said. He went back inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at his bandaged hands. Outside, he could hear Sinclair's men cutting his oats. He had never had anyone cut his oats before. He sat with that for a long time. It was the hardest thing about the whole summer. And it was the thing that changed him. Sinclair came to Jesse's property 10 days after the fire. Not announced. He appeared at the south fence line on horseback and dismounted and came through the gate and walked the property the way he had walked his own land for 40 years, looking at everything, reading it, arriving at conclusions without asking for input. Jesse walked with him. They did not talk much. Sinclair looked at the fence work, the Glidden wire tensioned correctly, the posts at the angle Eleanor had established on the second day. He looked at the oat field, now cut and stacked by his own men. He looked at the barn roof, the patch that wouldn't last the winter. He looked at the 4 cattle in the south pasture. At the south fence, he stopped. He put his hand on a post and tested it solid. 2 degrees into the tension. Exactly. Right. The big die up. Sinclair said Kirkwood lost everything in February of '87. I bought some of his cattle for 10 cents on the dollar when he walked off. He said it without pride, just as a fact. I've been watching this land for 6 years. I know what it was and what it needs. So do I, Jesse said. Sinclair looked at him. The Northfield East Third you replanted with a shorter variety. Eleanor told me about the drainage. Jesse said she was right. Sinclair said. I taught her that. Something moved through his face. Complicated. Something a man of 60 feels when he has been teaching his daughter things for 20 years and finds her teaching someone else. I built this ranch in 10 years, Sinclair said. Started with a horse and a bedroll and $30 I'd saved working other men's cattle in Ohio. He looked at the south fence. My daughter told me you knew that. Louise at the general store, Jesse said. Sinclair almost smiled. I told myself I didn't want Eleanor to go through what I went through, he said. Starting from nothing, building year by year. He was quiet. I think I've been confusing protecting her with deciding for her. Jesse said nothing. Sinclair looked at him. You went back into a burning barn 3 times after the roof beam cracked. He said, for animals belonging to a man who told you to stay away from his daughter. He let that sit for a moment. I can't argue with that, he said. Not because you saved my horses. Because you went back when no one was watching and nothing was owed, and the only reason was that 3 horses were still inside. He put his hat back on. I'm not giving you my blessing today, he said. I'm telling you, I'm no longer your enemy. There's a difference. He mounted his horse. At the gate, he stopped. The barn roof. He said, before winter, I'll send materials. Jesse looked at him. I'll pay for the materials, Jesse said. Sinclair looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. You will. He rode north. Jesse stood at the south fence and watched him go and thought, that is a man who just did the hardest thing he has done in years. He went back to work. They were married in September. The decision had been made in August on Jesse's porch in the Montana evening, simply and without ceremony because neither of them needed ceremony. He had asked her plainly. She had said yes before he finished the sentence, which she told him afterwards she had been ready to do since approximately the Tuesday in April when he had said, "Land that nobody wants still needs someone to believe in it." The wedding was in the Cedar Creek Church. Eleanor dressed in the small room off the vestibule with Louise Fenwick attending the details and two friends from Clearwater. She wore her mother's necklace given to her at her mother's funeral, worn on every important occasion since. The church was filling. Her father was not there. She had known he might not come. Sinclair had said, "I'm no longer your enemy." He had never said, "I give you my blessing." She had told herself she was prepared for the distinction. She had been telling herself this with decreasing conviction for 3 weeks. Louise fixed the last detail and stepped back. Eleanor picked up her flowers. She put her hand on the door to the church. "Eleanor." Louise's voice soft and pointing. She turned. Louise was looking past her toward the back of the church. The back door was open. In the doorway, in his good coat, hat in his hands, stood Richard Sinclair. He looked at his daughter the way a man looks at something he has been reconsidering for weeks and has finally arrived at the right answer about. He walked up the aisle toward her slowly with the deliberate weight of a man who is doing something that is costing him something real. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face for a long moment. "You look like your mother," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. She said nothing. She was not going to make this easy because it should not be easy, but she was not going to make it hard either. "I've been watching that man build something," Sinclair said, "since March. The fence, the field, the way he went back into the barn when my own foreman wouldn't." He looked at her. A man who returns to a burning barn for animals belonging to his enemy does not do it for recognition. He does it because it's who he is. He offered her his arm. "My daughter," he said quietly, "is not going to walk to that altar alone." She looked at his arm. She looked at his face, at the 60 years of it, at the stubbornness and the pride and the love underneath both that had always been there. She took his arm, the same arm she had held at her mother's funeral. They walked down the aisle together. Jessie was at the altar. He watched them come. The woman he was going to marry and the man who had told him to stay away from her and had appeared at the back of the church on a September morning because 6 months of watching had led him to the only honest conclusion available. Jessie looked at Sinclair. Sinclair looked at Jessie. It was not warm. It was not a smile. It was the look of a man who has made a decision he intends to keep, which from Richard Sinclair was everything. They stayed on Jessie's 240 acres. This surprised Clearwater County, which had expected the marriage to mean Jessie moving to 5,000 acres and the Sinclair name. It was the logical assumption. It was wrong. They stayed because it was Jessie's and because Eleanor had spent enough afternoons on it to understand what it was becoming and because both of them understood that the easy path was not the same as the right one. Sinclair sent 20 Morgan cattle in October. Good stock, his best breeding cows, delivered without ceremony with a note that said, "For the south pasture, the grass is good there. The Morgan bloodline will suit the terrain." Jessie read it twice. He put it in the kitchen table drawer where he kept things that mattered. The herd grew carefully, not quickly. 20 became 32 by the second year. 32 became 48 by the third. The Morgan cattle breeding true in the south pasture. The bloodline Sinclair had sent producing animals that were worth considerably more than the cattle Jessie had started with. The barn roof was replaced properly in October with materials Jessie paid for himself and Sinclair's men helped install, which was the arrangement Sinclair had proposed and Jessie had accepted without argument, which was itself a measure of how much had changed since March. Richard Sinclair came for Sunday supper starting in November of the first year. Not every Sunday, some Sundays, with the irregularity of a man who is moving towards something and cannot be hurried. He sat at Jessie's kitchen table and talked about cattle and weather and the price of feed and billings with the focus of a man for whom these things were never merely conversation. On a Sunday evening in the second year, walking to his horse after supper, he stopped at the south fence, the one Jesse had started on the day after Eleanor first rode through the gate, the fence that had been the beginning of everything. He put his hand on a post. 2 degrees into the tension. He tested it solid. He did not say anything. He nodded once, the nod of a man delivering a verdict, and mounted his horse and rode north toward his own property. Jesse stood at the gate and watched him go. Eleanor stood beside him. "He'll never say it," she said. "I know," Jesse said. "He doesn't have to," she said. "No," Jesse said. He put his arm around her. The Montana evening held them at the south fence of a ranch that had been abandoned by the Big Die-Up and was now the most cared-for property in Clearwater County. The mountains were doing what they always did. The Morgan cattle were in the south pasture where they were supposed to be, and everything, the land and the herd and the fence standing correctly, and the woman beside him and the old man riding north who would be back next Sunday was exactly right. Jesse Calloway spent 11 years saving $420. He spent it on a property the Big Die-Up had broken and nobody else wanted. The fence down, the barn caved, the fields gone back to wildness after 6 years of nothing being asked of them. He got off his horse. He stood in the main field and felt certain about something nobody else could see. That certainty is the whole story. A man who saw what neglected land could become and had the patience to bring it out post by post, section by section, in the correct order rather than the comfortable one. A woman who came to buy it and stayed to help fix the fence, and found somewhere between the post angle and the April afternoons that what he was building was something she wanted to be part of. And a father who had built 5,000 acres from $30 and a bedroll and had forgotten somewhere in the building that what he was actually making was a life, and that a life is built from character, not acreage. He remembered on a Wednesday night in July when a man went back into a burning barn after the roof beam cracked for 11 horses that belonged to his enemy. No calculation, no performance, no audience. Just 3 more horses were still inside.